Today, we're going to be taking a look at the UAC internals for the Murray M&P. So specifically in this video, we'll be looking at the UAC match grade hammer, sear, and trigger bar for the Murray M&P. And today we will not be doing a review of this trigger. This is the UAC trigger that was recently released. I have done nothing to it besides installing it in my M&P, because right now the take-up is still there. I haven't done anything to it. But it's compatible to drop in. It's a very, very nice trigger. I will be doing a review of it shortly. So anyways, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at more of the internal stuff. So the hammer, the sear, as well as the spring that actuates the sear comes in a package. And that comes for roughly around 200 and 300 Hong Kong dollars, which translates to roughly around 40 to 45 US dollars, depending on where you buy it. And the trigger bar retails for 100 to 120 Hong Kong dollars, which translates to roughly around 25 US dollars. Those are pretty much the standard price that you'll get for these parts. They're actually quite competitively priced, very fairly priced, considering the performance upgrade that it gives to your Murray M&P, and we'll go over that later on towards the video. So in this video, just to let you guys know, I will not be showing you guys how to install it. I'll be showing you basically what it looks like, and comparing it to what it looks like to the Murray internals, and then I'll be telling you guys all the advantages, disadvantages, and all the bad stuff that I've encountered with this hammer set. Mostly good, but we'll just go through the bad stuff as well. Okay, so let's take a closer look. So starting with the hammer, and the hammer rotor is right over here, by the way. So this is the Murray one, this is the UAC one. Can you see that they're very, very similar in structure? However, this piece over here is slightly different. It's smaller, if anything. And I noticed the finishing on the UAC is quite nice, although I can still see I think it's the CNC marks when they were milling out this thing. I can still sort of see them. You can even see these on the Glock parts that they make, which I do have and I will be doing a review on soon. And on this side, I noticed that this chunk over here is slightly bigger. Nothing much else to note. Internal, the internal shape of the area that contacts the valve knocker appears to be the same. I can't tell if there's a difference, but the major difference that I see is that this thing on top over here is slightly different. If anything, it seems to inch itself away from the rotor a little bit further than it's supposed to. So this is the way that the rotor sits when it's on the Murray one. This is the way it sits when it's on the UAC one. As you can see, there's significantly more space. Not sure if that affects anything. And as of right now, when I put the rotor on this, it seems to feel the same as if it was on the Murray one. Although I say the Murray one feels a little bit smoother. So that's primarily the differences with the hammer. And let's move on to the sear. So the sear looks exactly identical. I literally can't tell a difference. Although it does look slightly different in shape in terms of this edge, this tip over here. Can you see that the UAC one is slightly shorter? But they're very, very similar in structure. That's basically it, really. Nothing really special to note. And again, just by looking at it, it's very, very hard to tell, because many people, including myself, don't really understand the UAC parts, or any of the new parts for the Tokyo Murray M&P. I just don't understand every single nook and cranny of it. But that's primarily it. And the trigger bar. So for all you guys that were very, very curious about the way I modified my trigger bar, can you see that I actually have mine modified? So let me just put them side by side. Can you see that I actually cut mine by a little bit? By a good millimeter over on this side over here. And what that basically does is that it affects your breaking point and your reset point. And this is a modification that I copied off a Japanese blogger that got his M&P modified. I basically did that. And the reason why my trigger bar is shiny is because as I did that, I accidentally chipped some of the metal. So I had to just quickly clean it up and polish it and clean it up. It doesn't make your trigger bar smoother or the breaking point smoother. It's just that when I roughed up the texture, I decided to clean it up a little bit. But the UAC one is very, very smooth and very, very clean. Like, this is excellent finishing. Like, I'm so surprised that it looks like this. Like, it's literally looks like gold. That's really, really cool. So yeah. And the height of some of this part looks very, very similar in shape and structure. They appear to be exactly the same. I'm wondering if I'm going to experience any special properties by using this trigger bar. is because if you guys know your UAC parts very well, when they built their Glock trigger bar for the Murray Glock, their trigger bar is slightly different, up to a point where you don't even need to have a tunable trigger. But we'll take note of that in this video. Okay, so I just installed the pin on the trigger bar, so that's done. I'll set it aside, and now let's look at the sear. So when you get it from UAC, when you get the sear from UAC, it actually comes packaged with a small spring, and that spring is for their sear. If you look at the Murray one, you actually notice that their spring is super tough. In fact, I don't know why the spring has to be so tough. It is like really strong. It's such a small spring and it's really tough. If I were you, keep this aside just in case that one day if you lose this spring, you have a backup. Okay, so set that aside. And this is the spring. So installing it on this little pole or little post over here, it's quite tricky. If I were you, do it in a box so that in the event that this flies off, you can still keep track of it. So I just basically pushed it in very carefully, and I actually used a pair of pliers just to guide it into the pit in place. If I were you guys, do it some other way, but that's the way I chose to do it. So let's take this side of the chassis. This side of the chassis does not have the springs. This side it does, okay? So over here, simply move the spring into this area over here. Can you see that there's sort of like a window? That's that window. This area over here. Weave that spring in, and then you'll be able to weave this piece into the chassis. Make sure you don't lose the spring while you're at it, by the way. So now, just check, actuate the spring with your hand, see if it moves. So okay, so it moves correctly. And I can tell right now that the sear is moving very soft. And then afterwards, you take your I don't know what you call this. This is the screw that holds onto the sear. Okay, let's just call it that. Put it on. And afterwards, you can start working on your hammer assembly. Don't torque it down too tight. If you torque it down too tight, it won't move. Okay, so good. See right there, it moves. Okay, so that's good. Wow, it's very light. Very light. Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Anyways, let's move on. Oh, you know what? The spring moved out of position. Let me quickly move it back to position, okay? But you basically get the general idea. See that? That's incorrect. It needs to be perfectly vertical. So I've owned the hammer assembly for quite some time, for pretty much as long as possible right now. So the very first thing I noticed is that UAC advertises this hammer assembly to make your action of your hammer a little bit smoother, and it makes the trigger pull a little lighter. Now, as far as I can tell, okay, regardless of what any other tech thinks right now, as far as I can tell, that appears to be true, believe it or not. And they are drop-in parts, they appear to be true. Okay, all those appears to be true, and here's the reason why. So the first thing I talked about is the smoothness of the hammer. Now, in order to explain this for you, you must first understand what the Murray one was like. So what the Murray one was like is that basically whenever you cock your hammer or pull your slide back, you will encounter some resistance and then your hammer will lock. The reason why this happens on the black MMP as well as on the VTAC MMP, it's because of this. Watch what happens to the hammer, and this is the sear, by the way. This right here, this part I'm poking at, is the sear. Now, once you get up to this point, you encounter some resistance, okay? And then you push it down further, and then it cocks. Now, the reason why you encounter resistance when you get up to this point is because you have to keep in mind, whenever the hammer cocks back, it has to get up to the point where the sear will lock the hammer. And before that point, you have to fight the sear. You have to fight the sear spring that's sitting on the sear, and that's the reason why you are getting this gritty feeling whenever you cock your hammer. That sear spring, as I mentioned before earlier, it's very stiff. It is so stiff that if you push it with your own hand, your thumbs will actually hurt because that spring is super stiff. By the way, it is this spring right now that's sitting on the sear. Okay? And that's basically the reason why your hammer is very, very difficult to cock. You can even visually see this for yourself. As you cock it, you can see your sear moving. Can you see? It's moving. Okay, so you have to fight that first. However, on the UAC one, notice how it behaves. Okay, now the sear is completely black, so it's very, very hard for you to see, but you can see some of the reflection right there. Okay, notice how simple that was. Notice how smooth that was. The only resistance that I feel is the strength of the hammer spring. Other than that, this is a very, very smooth system. The way that this hammer locks with the sear is very, very soft. Very, very soft feeling. This is just extraordinary, in fact. I'm quite surprised that this actually feels like that. So the first thing I noticed that when I installed it in this is that my M&P cycles a little bit faster, which is very, very surprising to me. This is just absolutely a phenomenal upgrade in that sense. It just makes it so much easier to cock this hammer. It just works fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And as far as I can tell, the rotor seems to spin just as freely on the UAC one. Although, personally, I would polish that a little bit. I don't bother with that. It does work. I'm just saying that that's something that I wanted to do. I haven't done it yet just because I'm too lazy. So anyways, that's the first thing I had to talk about, is that this is a significant improvement in the smoothness of the hammer. Okay, so that's one thing. So now for the second thing. The second thing is the trigger, or how light it feels now. So as far as I can tell, I don't have a way to gauge this for you, but as far as I can tell, the trigger does in fact feel lighter. It feels so light, in fact, that the trigger breaks very, very quickly. Unlike the old trigger. So if you guys know the Murray M&P very, very well, you will know that the trigger feels very spongy. The breaking point is weird. The reset point is weird. It's just a very spongy trigger. In fact, if I recall correctly, the trigger pull is like 340 grams or 350 grams. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember the trigger pull being quite heavy on the stock Murray M&P. But for this one, so let us show you guys what it originally looked like first. So this is just with the VTAC M&P. It is, by the way, the breaking point and the reset point on the Murray M&P is in fact different from the black one. It is better, it is slightly smoother, however, it is still quite spongy in my personal. It's not as spongy as the black one, but it's better. Okay, so watch how it behaves. Okay, so I'm going to remove the take up, and when you get up to this point right here, there feels like there's a wall here, okay? But this is not in fact a wall. You actually have to push it a little bit further, and then it breaks. Okay, watch carefully again. Wall, but it's not a wall. And then it breaks. Okay, so that resistance that I feel there, okay, is a combination of that trigger of the spring over here, and a combination of the spring over here. You can actually feel it. You can fight it as you push the trigger. You can feel it. It's fighting it. Okay. However, on the UAC one, I noticed that right off the bat, it's the trigger pull. Okay, let me point a light here, just so that it's easier for you to see. Sorry about that. I need to work on the lighting on this new camera. But anyways, you should be able to see it. Let me know if you can't. But basically what happens is that as I pull the trigger, this is the take up, and now this is the wall. Okay? It is a very clean break now. The second I pass this wall over here, it just breaks quickly. Very, very quickly, very, very softly. It is a very, very lightweight trigger. This is another significant thing. This is the first thing I noticed, in fact. Just because when I was pulling the trigger, it was extremely, extremely light. In fact, it is way lighter than I expected. It is not as light as a Glock trigger if you do that custom seal work. It's not as light as that, but it is very, very close to that. It is incredibly close, a very good upgrade. And this is in combination with the UAC trigger bar. So I'm not sure how this will perform with the stock trigger bar. I'm not sure how that will perform, but as I just chose to use AAC and match it with UAC, okay, because that's just the way I like it. I like to match parts. But keep in mind, I did do a lot of work to remove the breaking point and all that stuff, so not too important. It's a very, very famous modification, by the way. If you've never seen this modification before, there's a Japanese blogger, and I'll leave the link to his website in the description box below. He's the one who figured out this modification, not me. I'm not that smart. Anyways, so that's pretty much all I have to say about the UAC parts. Makes the trigger lighter, makes the smoothness of the hammer very, very light. I really like this upgrade. I know I sound like a UAC salesman, I know I sound like a broken record, but really, truly is absolutely phenomenal. However, let's get up to the bad parts now. The bad parts are sort of very, very weird. Believe it or not, these are things I've all seen myself before I actually come out and say in the video. So the first thing I noticed is that sometimes when you buy this hammer set from any store whatsoever, if you look inside the packaging, let me just grab something. Okay, this is not the packaging for the hammer. Okay, it's packaging for something else. I forgot what. But basically, when you have the hammer internals in there, I actually saw rust inside the package. Okay, I am not so sure why. I have seen this in multiple occasions. Some people who literally brought their hammer sets to me, I was like, they haven't even ripped out the package yet. And inside, I could see rust building up inside the package that's coming off of the hammer. That's the one thing that I don't really like. So these hammer internals, as far as I can tell, they seem to have some sort of potential to rust if you let it sit in here for a very, very long time. I lubricate mine with the JL Progression oil. I just put some on my railings, and then it just happens to slip in here. I don't actually, put this and dip it in there. I don't actually do that. I just put it on the sides, and it just happens to go in there. So the very first thing, that's just one of the bad things I notice. If you buy stuff from WGC, sometimes they have a tendency to have a lot of moisture buildup on it just because of the way they store things. If you bought some guns from WGC before, you may have noticed a moisture buildup in their boxes. That's one thing I don't really like about them. They don't really get back to you on that. But don't quite quote me on that. I'm just letting you know that, as far as I can tell, sometimes when you buy some of the package, there's a little bit of rust accumulated inside of here. So just be aware of that. Excuse me. Now, so that's the first thing. Second thing I noticed is that I've heard some people in Hong Kong are having a full auto issue with their Tokyo Marui MMPs. Now, I'm not a techie guy for the Marui MMP, even though I do a lot of teching for my own MMP. As far as I can tell, UAC, I'm not so sure if UAC is the problem, but as far as I can tell, what I see is that when I cock their hammer, I don't see their sear locking properly in place. I think that has to do with the spring. You know the spring in there that rests on the sear? That sits on the sear right over here. Sometimes if you install this incorrectly into the hammer assembly, what happens is that sear backs out. Not the sear. The spring tries to exit the hammer assembly through the side or through any other way it can. You can actually tell if you actually see the spring, it will actually be angled or weaving it through some sort of weird way. That is the reason, as far as I can tell, that is the reason why you may have a full auto issue, is because that sear spring is not seated correctly. Like, keep in mind, the locking point of this appears to be exactly the same as the MMP, as the Marui MMP hammer stock internals. Like the hammer, like literally, can you see the rotor? Is exactly the same position as if it was the Marui internals. So as far as I can tell, it's not a UAC problem. It's just if you install that spring incorrectly, you may or may not have that problem. Okay, so it's not a really big deal. All you have to do is open this up and realign it. If you broke that spring, you can always just use the one that Marui gave you. Although I really don't like this one. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for the video. That's pretty much all I have to say about the UAC internals and stuff. I will be doing a review of this trigger very, very soon. But before I end the video, let's just quickly test fire it just to show you guys how it performs. Alright guys, so this will be the quick magazine dump test. Full magazine, green gas 0.25 gram BBs. Okay. Now, if you want to curious as to everything I've done in here, besides the UAC parts, you can check out my 10.8 video showing you guys all the stuff I've modified in this Marui MMP. It's very, very basic, really. Nothing that you can't do at home. Very simple. So, here we go. Now, I have to do this, so otherwise the videos will literally come out of this box. And I can't shoot the normal WE box because I've shot through that already. Anyways. very, very simple. As you can see, mine's is still sort of sluggish, but it cycles a little bit faster just from some basic upgrades, right? So yeah, it's very, very... by the way, just to let you know, everyone who gets a detonator slide, that's a 4.25 inch, can get a slide lock. Okay, it's very, very simple. It does that on its own without upgrades already, okay? So this is just an improvement on the basic, really. So that's it for the video, guys. Hope you guys liked the video. Please feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Peace, guys. Happy shooting.